November 1842, Wind River Valley, Wyoming Territory. I watched my breath turn to ice crystals 3 feet from the fireplace and understood I'd made a terrible mistake. The cabin looked sound. I'd spent 2 months cutting cottonwood logs, notching corners, chinking gaps with clay and prairie grass. Split cedar roof, greased paper window, stone fireplace, 14 by 16 feet. Everyone at the trading post said it would do fine. They were wrong. The cold arrived November 8th. The temperature dropped 40 degrees in an afternoon. By midnight, 8 below zero. I kept the fire roaring, fed it until smoke filled the room. The heat pushed maybe 6 feet from the hearth before it died. Beyond that, dangerous cold. I laid my bedroll close to the fire, 2 wool blankets, bearskin coat. Every time I started to drift off, the cold woke me, face burning from fire, back freezing from the wall. Past midnight, I saw the frost. It had formed on the inside of the log walls, delicate patterns catching, firelight. I pressed my hand against the logs, frozen solid. The clay chinking had cracked. Wind pushed through in thin streams that never stopped. The cabin wasn't keeping cold out, it was just slowing it down. Every log conducted outside temperature inward. Every crack leaked warmth away. I was burning firewood to warm the Wyoming night. Dawn came, 20 below outside. My water bucket had frozen solid 4 feet from the fireplace. I chipped ice off my beard and calculated. 4 cords of wood at my current burn rate gave me 2.5 weeks. We were barely into November. January would be colder. I'd freeze to death around Christmas. The native people who'd lived here for generations didn't have iron stoves or endless firewood. They survived these winters, raised children, maintained communities. What did they know that I didn't? The wind rattled the roof. My hands were raw. My back ached. This was only the first serious cold. 4 more months ahead. I wasn't going to make it. Not like this. Mid-morning, I heard a mule outside. I opened the door. The cold took my breath away. A Shoshone woman sat on a gray mule 30 feet from my cabin, maybe 40 years old, leather and fur, bundle of pelts. I recognized her from the trading post. The traders called her Morning Dove. She looked at the thick smoke rising from my chimney, then at me. "Your fire is very hungry," she said in clear English. I nodded. "You will run out of wood before the moon changes twice." "I know." "Why do white men build houses that fight the earth instead of using it?" She gestured at my cabin, the smoke, the obvious desperation. "Your house pushes heat up and out. The earth would hold it in. But you build on top of the earth, not inside it." Something in her tone suggested this wasn't casual observation. She knew something I didn't. "Can you show me?" I asked. She considered. "Tomorrow, half a day's walk. Bring your blanket. You will stay the night." She turned her mule and headed down. The valley trail. Whatever she wanted to show me had to be better than freezing to death in a cabin that ate firewood faster than I could cut it. Morning Dove returned at dawn, 12 below. I'd packed my blanket, dried venison, and canteen. We walked east 3 hours, leading our animals, following a trail into the hills. The wind faded to occasional gusts. More sheltered here. She stopped at a low ridge. I saw nothing unusual until she pointed. A small opening in the earth 3 feet high, partially obscured by brush. Thin smoke, rising. "My winter home," she said. I stared. That hole was her house? She crouched at the entrance. "Come." I followed on hands and knees. The tunnel sloped down into earth at 30 degrees, 8 feet long. Packed earth walls, smooth and solid. The temperature changed as I crawled. Less cold. The wind disappeared. The tunnel opened into a circular room 12 feet across, domed ceiling 6 feet high at center. Earth walls covered with grass mats. Earth floor with layers of hide and reeds. Small fire pit holding glowing coals. Smoke hole in the ceiling. An older man worked on a beaver pelt. 2 children played with painted stones. They looked up without surprise. The temperature struck me first. warm. After my cabin, after walking through bitter cold, this felt like refuge. My numb face tingled as feeling returned. No roaring fire, no massive woodpile, just coals giving steady heat that filled the space evenly. "This is my father," Mourning Dove said. "He speaks little English." The old man studied me, then spoke. Mourning Dove translated. "He wants to know why you burn so much wood in your log house." "Because I'm cold. The cabin won't hold heat," the old man responded. "He says you build like a fool. You make a box on top of the earth and try to fill it with heat. The heat rises and escapes. Everything you build fights against you." I couldn't argue. He'd described exactly what I'd experienced. "So how do you stay warm?" He pressed his palm against the floor, pointed at the walls, the ceiling. Mourning Dove translated. "The earth 6 feet down never freezes. In summer it stays cool. In winter it stays warm, always the same. We dig into the hillside so earth surrounds us. The earth holds warmth from our bodies, from our small fire, from the sun on the south slope above us. It holds that warmth like stone holds heat from the sun. The earth does not let cold in because the earth itself is not cold. 6 feet of earth between this room and outside air, better insulation than my foot-thick logs. Won't the earth collapse? The ceiling is shaped like the sky, round. The earth presses down on itself and holds. If you make it flat, it falls. Round, it stands for many winters." I looked up. In the dim light I saw branches woven together, supporting the earth above. "How long to build this?" "One man alone, working hard, maybe 2 weeks. But you must know how. You must understand the earth, how deep to dig, how to shape walls so they don't fall, where to put the smoke hole, how to make the entrance tunnel slope right. Will you teach me?" The old man studied. "Me longer." Mourning Dove translated his question. "He wants to know if you will listen. Many white men think they know better. They see what we do and change it. Then it doesn't work, and they blame us. I'll listen. My cabin is killing me." He nodded slowly. "He will teach you, but this is not a trick. This is knowledge. You must learn why things work, not just what to do. If you understand why, you can build anywhere." He added 2 small pieces to the coals. The fire grew to 1/3 the size of what I burned in my cabin, yet this room felt warmer than my cabin ever had. That afternoon he showed me how the space worked. Fire pit shallow, lined with creek stones, smoke hole offset so rising heat traveled across the domed ceiling before escaping, warming earth there first. Sleeping spaces at the perimeter where walls met floor, warmest spots because earth held heat like a battery. The entrance tunnel sloped down, then up. Cold air sank into the tunnel but couldn't rise into the living space. Warm air stayed where it belonged. Everything had a reason. This wasn't a crude hole. This was sophisticated architecture refined through centuries of winters. That night, I slept warmer than I had since arriving in Wyoming. The fire burned to coals. No one added wood. Temperature stayed steady. I woke once in darkness, feeling even warmth surrounding me. Survival wasn't about fighting the environment. It was about working with it. Morning came slowly. No window, just gradual brightening of the smoke hole. Mourning Dove's father was already awake, feeding small sticks to coals, building just enough fire to cook. After breakfast, he gestured for me to follow. We crawled outside into air that felt vicious after the pit house warmth. 18 below. He walked the hillside, stopping every few yards to dig 6 inches into snow and frozen soil, feeling the earth beneath. I followed, watching, trying to understand. After a dozen spots, he stopped and nodded. Mourning Dove translated. "This is good earth for building, not too many rocks. The soil packs well." She dug past frozen surface into merely cold earth, pulled up a handful. I took it, rubbed it between fingers, fine-grained, slightly damp, clay component making it sticky. "This earth holds its shape when you pack it," she said. "Too sandy, walls crumble. Too rocky, you cannot shape it. You must know the earth before you dig." Her father pointed uphill. "Also look at how water moves. In spring, when snow melts, does water flow here? If yes, you cannot build. Your pit house will flood. Find where water drains away, where earth stays dry even in the wettest season." We spent the morning walking hillsides. He showed me how to read the land. Identify good building sites by vegetation, by slope angle, by snow depth compared to other areas. A south-facing slope was essential. Winter sun, low in the southern sky, would warm that slope. That warmth, absorbed during sunny days, would heat the pit house from outside. "The earth is like stone in sun," Mourning Dove translated. "Takes time to warm, but once warm, holds that warmth long. North-facing slope, sun never touches. Stays cold all winter. South-facing slope, even in winter with snow, sun still warms it." By midday I understood site selection basics, similar to carpenter knowledge about level ground and drainage, but adapted to hillside angles and cold airflow patterns. That afternoon he taught construction principles using stick diagrams in frozen ground, profile view showing entrance tunnel sloping down, then main room floor higher than tunnel's lowest point. Top view showing circular main room, fire pit position, offset smoke hole. "Size matters," Mourning Dove translated. "Too small, cannot stand. Too large, hard to keep warm. One person, maybe 8 feet across. Family, 12 or 14 feet. Ceiling high enough to stand at center, but not too high. Heat rises. Too high. All heat far above your head." Another diagram showing depth. "Must dig at least 6 feet from surface. Better 7 or 8 feet. This puts you below where winter cold reaches. Earth that deep stays at its own temperature. In summer, cooler than air. In winter, warmer. Always around 50 degrees if deep enough." 50 degrees. My cabin with its massive fire rarely got warmer than 40 degrees beyond the hearth. This pit house with tiny fire stayed 55 degrees. The difference wasn't the fire. The difference was the earth. The entrance tunnel took the afternoon to explain. Narrow enough you can't stand, wide enough to crawl through with firewood. Must slope down from outside, then back up into main room. Lowest point, at least 2 feet below room floor. "This traps the cold," Mourning Dove said. "Cold air is heavy, sinks. When you open entrance, cold flows down tunnel, cannot flow up into room because it's heavy. Warm air in room is light, rises to ceiling and stays. You have made a trap for cold." He demonstrated with burning sage. The smoke flowed down the outer tunnel, stopped, and hovered at the lowest point, unable to continue into the main room. Cold air behaved the same way. As afternoon wore into evening, I understood building a pit house wasn't about following instructions. It was about understanding principles. Earth holds temperature, cold air sinks, heat rises, curved structures support themselves. South-facing slopes absorb sun, each principle connected to others, creating a system working with the environment. That second night I watched how he maintained fire, never let it grow large, added small sticks every hour, just enough to keep coals glowing. Heat radiated outward. Much was absorbed by earth walls, which stored it and released it slowly back over hours. Smoke rose to ceiling, traveled across dome to smoke hole, exited in steady thin stream. No smoke stayed inside. Air remained clear, yet no wind whistling through cracks, no draft sucking heat away. Before sleep, Mourning Dove's father spoke to me directly in English, first time I'd heard him use the language. "White men think houses are boxes. You cut trees, make walls, stack them up, make a box. Box sits on earth like a thing apart. But we know earth is part of house. House is part of earth. You do not build on top, you build within. Earth is not your enemy. Earth is your shelter. You only must go deep enough to find it." He paused, poking coals. "Tomorrow I show you how to dig, how to know if earth will hold or fall, how to shape walls, make ceilings strong. But tonight, think about this. Think about earth. Think about how it holds warmth. Think about how you have been fighting it when you should be using it. Next morning before dawn, I woke to find them preparing to leave, trading camp 3 days south. They needed to bring pelts before deep cold made travel impossible. Think about what you learned, Morning Dove said. Decide if you will build a pit house or stay in your log box. If you decide to build, come find us in spring. We will help you. Before I crawled into the entrance tunnel, her father stopped me. He pressed something into my hand. Small piece of braided leather cord with a stone bead. When you dig your pit house, he said in halting English, hang this above the door. It means you learned from the earth. It means you understand. I closed my fist around the cord and nodded. Then I crawled out into brutal Wyoming cold and began the long walk back to my cabin. The walk back took most of the day, below zero, wind gusting northwest. By the time I reached my cabin, hands numb, feet like blocks of wood. Inside, cold had taken complete possession, water bucket frozen solid, frost thick as my thumb on walls. I built up the fire, burning an armload of logs to make the cabin merely tolerable. As I sat by the hearth that evening, I thought about the last 2 days. I couldn't stay in this cabin, not through a Wyoming winter, not unless I wanted to burn every tree within 5 miles and still freeze. I spent 3 days thinking, 3 days feeding fire, cutting wood, trying to sleep. On the 3rd day I decided I would build a pit house, alone, using what I'd been taught. I'd probably make mistakes, but even a poorly built pit house had to be better than this cabin. I spent a week finding a site, examined 24 possible locations, each time remembered something and saw problems. Too rocky, too flat, north-facing, in a drainage path. Finally found a spot 1/4 mile from my cabin, south-facing hillside, rising gently above the creek, slope moderate, maybe 20 degrees. Earth was right consistency when I dug test holes, fine-grained with enough clay to hold shape. Vegetation showed good drainage, juniper trees on slope for ceiling support, creek rocks for fire pit. I stood there long, checking every factor. Sun on the slope, cold air draining downhill, entrance could face south, high enough that spring runoff wouldn't reach here. This was the place. Started digging when temperature was 5 degrees. Ground frozen first 6 inches. Below that, merely cold, hard-packed, but workable. Used pickaxe to break frozen layer, shovel to remove loosened earth. Plan was to dig 12 feet diameter, 6 feet center ceiling height, roughly 700 cubic feet of earth. A cubic foot of packed earth weighs about 100 pounds. 35 tons of material to remove. First day, removed maybe 6 inches from the 12-foot circle, 50 cubic feet. 3 hours of continuous hard labor. At that rate, 42 hours of digging total, spread over weeks with weather and rest days, looking at a month just for excavation. But I'd started, developed a routine, wake at first light, eat, walk to site, dig 3 hours, return to cabin, cut and haul firewood, maintain fire, sleep, repeat. At 2 feet deep, I noticed something. Earth at that depth was noticeably warmer than surface. Not warm absolutely, but no longer frozen solid. Cold like a root cellar, not like exposed ground in November. At 3 feet, the difference became more pronounced. Earth at the bottom felt almost neutral, not cold, not warm, stable. I'd reached where seasonal temperature swings began to dampen out. At 4 feet, I rested at the bottom. Air calmer here. Wind didn't reach into excavation. Earth walls felt like they were holding something. I pressed my palm against the wall, cool but not painful to touch. Didn't pull heat away like logs in my cabin. This was what Morning Dove's father meant. Earth at this depth was disconnected from surface temperature extremes, buffered by soil mass above, insulated by earth around it. If I could create a living space here, I wouldn't be fighting winter cold. I'd be living where winter cold couldn't reach. At 6 feet, my shovel hit rock, worked around it with pickaxe, found its edges, pried it loose, 40 pounds of sandstone, hauled it out. would be useful for fire pit. More rocks appeared deeper. Some I could remove. Others, too large or too embedded, had to adjust floor plan around them, reshaping the circle. The earth decides certain things. You must listen. At 6 feet deep, began shaping walls. Up until now, excavating straight down, creating cylinder. But walls needed to curve inward to support dome ceiling. Started cutting back into hillside, creating inward slope. Required careful work. Too steep, walls wouldn't hold. Too shallow, flat ceiling that would collapse. Worked from center outward, cutting. At about 60-degree angle, each shovel load placed carefully, wall examined, weak spots corrected. The earth taught me as I worked. Where soil was rich in clay, it held shape well. Where sandier, it wanted to crumble. Learned to feel the difference through the shovel. Work took 2 weeks. By the time I had basic room carved out, December had arrived. Temperature staying below 0, day and night. My cabin thermometer rarely climbed above 5 degrees, even with fire roaring. Burning wood at unsustainable rate. But the pit house was taking shape. I stood at center and looked around. Room roughly 12 feet across, 7 feet deep at center. Walls curved inward from floor to where ceiling would be. Earth stable, packed hard, no signs of collapse. I'd created a space inside the hillside, part of the earth rather than imposed upon it. Next phase would be ceiling and entrance tunnel, different skills, different materials. But for the first time since starting, I believed it would work. I believed I could build a shelter that would keep me alive. I climbed out as evening approached. Wind drove snow horizontally across hillside. I pulled my coat tight and started back toward cabin. Behind me, the excavation sat open to sky, waiting. In 2 more weeks, if I could finish ceiling and entrance, that hole in the ground would become my home. The ceiling was what I feared most. Dig down, surround yourself with earth, trap cold air. Those made sense. But the ceiling required spanning 12 feet with branches, grass, and earth, creating a dome strong enough to support tons of weight from snow and soil. Mourning Dove's father had explained the principle. A dome distributes weight around its curve. Earth presses down evenly from all sides, and that pressure holds the structure together. Understanding the principle and executing it were vastly different. I started cutting juniper branches from the hillside. Needed long, straight pieces, at least 10 feet each, thick as my wrist. Cut and trimmed maybe 40 branches over 2 days, checking their straightness. The framework would be built in layers. First layer needed to span the full diameter. I selected the longest, straightest branches and began laying them across the opening, resting on walls at an angle, meeting in center to form the beginning of dome shape. Laid first, branch north to south wall. It bowed slightly under its own weight, creating natural arc. Second branch perpendicular, east to west. Where they crossed in center, I lashed them with hide strips. Third and fourth branches diagonally, creating 8-point star pattern, each curved from wall to center, each supporting and being supported by the others. Then, intermediate branches filling gaps between main supports running from wall to center at every angle. Added branches until open spaces between them were no more than 8 inches wide. The structure began taking shape, rough dome of juniper branches forming skeletal framework. Testing it was terrifying. I climbed into pit and stood at center, looking up at lattice work overhead. Reached up and pulled down on junction, where all main branches met. Structure flexed slightly but held. Force of my pulling distributed through all branches to walls. Nothing cracked. Nothing shifted. Next layer was grass mats. I'd been weaving prairie grass. Every evening for a week, creating mats roughly 3 feet square. These would cover branch framework, providing substrate for earth layer while keeping dirt from filtering through. Worked from walls inward, laying mats over branches, and tying them in place with grass cord. Mats overlapped like shingles. With grass layer complete, dome took on more solid appearance. You could no longer see through to sky. It looked almost like a structure, though still fragile. Final layer would be earth, most critical and dangerous phase. I needed to pile earth on top of dome, enough to provide insulation and weather protection, but not so much weight would collapse the structure. Mourning Dove's father had said, about 2 feet of earth, roughly 150 cubic feet of soil, something like 7 tons of weight resting on those juniper branches and grass mats. Started at walls, shoveling earth from excavation pile onto dome edges. Earth needed to be packed firmly, but not so aggressively. I'd push through grass. Layer. Worked carefully, adding maybe 6 inches at a time around perimeter, letting structure adjust before adding more weight. Dome flexed under load. I could see it from inside pit. Branches bent slightly, taking up weight, distributing it through interconnected structure. But they held. Slowly, methodically, I added more earth. 6 inches became a foot became 18 inches. Structure groaned occasionally, settling, adjusting. Each time I heard a sound, my heart stopped, but nothing collapsed. After 3 days, entire dome covered with 2 feet of packed earth. Left only 2 openings, one at highest point for smoke hole, about 8 inches diameter, and one on south-facing side for entrance tunnel. Smoke hole got special treatment. Found section of hollow log, about 10 inches diameter and 18 inches long. This would form chimney, keeping smoke hole from collapsing and directing smoke upward. Set this log vertically into opening at dome peak, packing earth around, base. Hollow core extended above earth layer by about 6 inches, enough to prevent snow blocking it. Entrance tunnel was next. Required digging into hillside at angle, creating passage that sloped down below pit house floor level, then back up into main room. Tunnel needed to be about 3 feet high and 2 feet wide, large enough to crawl through with firewood, but small enough it wouldn't leak too much air. Started digging at point about 10 feet south of pit house, angling down and north. After about 6 feet of tunnel, reached where I needed to start angling up toward pit house floor. Delicate work, digging toward an open space. If I miscalculated angle or distance, I'd either miss pit house entirely or break through wall in wrong place. Measured carefully, checked progress constantly, dug slowly. When my shovel finally broke through into pit house, I was exactly where I needed to be, at floor level, on south wall. Tunnel formed smooth J shape. From outside entrance, it sloped down 6 feet, reaching lowest point about 2 feet below pit house floor. Then it curved back up, rising into main room. This created cold air trap. Cold air would flow down entrance slope, but couldn't rise back up into living space. With tunnel complete, I had fully enclosed structure, dome-shaped room 7 feet deep, 12 feet diameter, surrounded by earth on all sides, except entrance tunnel. Smoke hole provided ventilation. Entrance provided access. Everything else was earth and stone and wood. Spent 2 days finishing interior. First, fire pit. Collected flat stones from creek, arranged them in circle at room center, creating shallow pit about 18 inches diameter and 6 inches deep. Stones would protect earth floor from direct fire and would absorb and radiate heat long after fire died down. Next, floor. Covered packed earth with layer of small stones and gravel for drainage, topped with woven grass mats and hides. Created surface that was dry, relatively soft, insulated from earth below. Finally gathered firewood and carried it through entrance tunnel, stacking it against wall. Brought in my bedroll, cooking implements, food stores. Brought in leather cord with stone bead that Mourning Dove's father gave me, and hung it above entrance to main room. On December 18, 1842, as sun set and temperature dropped to 15 below zero, I lit the first fire in my pit house. Used small twigs and juniper bark for kindling, building up to larger pieces until I had modest fire burning in stone-lined pit. Smoke rose naturally toward ceiling, traveling across dome, finding chimney hole, exiting cleanly. I sat cross-legged by fire and waited. Flames cast flickering shadows on earth walls. Curved ceiling seemed to glow in firelight. I could hear wind outside, distant sound, muffled by earth surrounding me. Inside pit house, air was still, calm, warming noticeably. After an hour, I added more wood and checked temperature. I'd brought thermometer from my cabin, hung it on wall opposite entrance. It read 48 degrees. Outside, according to thermometer I'd left at cabin, it was 15 below. I was 63 degrees warmer than outside air, and my fire was smaller than what I'd keep burning in cabin just to maintain miserable cold. After 2 hours, thermometer read 52 degrees. After 3 hours, 55 degrees. Then it stabilized. Pit house had reached equilibrium. Earth walls were absorbing heat from fire, and small amount my body generated. They were storing that heat in their mass, radiating it back evenly. Temperature wasn't going to get much warmer unless I built bigger fire, but it also wasn't going to get colder. Earth had become a battery for warmth, charging slowly from fire, discharging slowly into space. I let fire burn down to coals and didn't add more wood. In my cabin, this would have been insane. Within an hour, temperature would have plummeted. But in pit house, temperature dropped only a degree or two. Earth was still releasing stored heat. Structure was still buffered from outside cold by 7 feet of insulating soil. That night, I slept in genuine warmth for first time since arriving in Wyoming. Temperature in pit house never dropped below 50 degrees, even though I'd let fire die completely. I woke once in darkness, disoriented, wondering why I wasn't cold. Then I remembered where I was and understood. I wasn't cold because Earth wouldn't let me be cold. Earth 6 feet deep, holding stable 50 degrees regardless of surface conditions, was doing what I'd been unable to do with all my firewood and desperate labor. It was keeping me alive. January arrived with temperatures that made November seem mild. 20 below became normal. Some mornings, my old cabin's thermometer read 30 below. I'd walk past that cabin checking traps, see frost patterns on windows, remember waking up shivering despite burning half a cord of wood every few days. The pit house changed everything. I woke to steady warmth that let me dress without numb fingers, think clearly instead of just reacting to cold. Last night's fire had died hours ago, but temperature inside never dropped below 48 degrees. The earth held what the fire gave it. I developed new routines. Each evening I'd build a small fire, maybe a quarter the size of what I used to burn. I'd cook over it, sit and watch flames for an hour, then let it die to coals. Bank them with ash to preserve for morning. Starting fire from preserved coals took seconds. The entrance tunnel became familiar. I learned to crawl through without thinking, knew exactly where to duck, where floor, rose into main room. On coldest mornings, I felt temperature change moving through that tunnel. Outside air at 20 below, tunnel at maybe 10 degrees, main room at 50. The J-shaped trapped cold exactly as promised. I noticed things about Earth I'd never paid attention to before. Walls stayed dry after the first few days. Some moisture had worked out of packed earth, condensing on surface, then evaporating as room warmed. After that, walls stayed stable, dry. The grass mats prevented dirt falling into living space, but they weren't necessary for warmth. Earth itself was doing the insulating. Smoke hole worked better than expected. Smoke rose naturally, traveled across curved ceiling warming that earth, then exited through hollow log chimney. On calm days, smoke went straight up. On windy days, wind would sometimes push down into chimney, but pressure forced it back out immediately. Never woke to smoke-filled room. By second week of January, I'd learned to read the pit house like I read weather. Could tell outside temperature by how much frost formed at entrance tunnel's outer opening. Could judge how long fire would last by how coals looked. Could estimate firewood needed for a week by checking what I'd used before. Answer was always the same: very little. A bundle of sticks the size of my forearm lasted 2 days. A pile I could carry in one trip lasted a week, burning maybe 1/20th of what cabin required. I'd survive winter with firewood to spare. But the real difference was sleep. In cabin, I'd slept in 3 or 4 hour blocks, waking to feed fire, never resting deeply. In pit house, I slept through the night, 8 hours, sometimes 9. Woke naturally as dawn approached, refreshed, warm, ready. Cold outside was relentless. January brought storms lasting 3 days, winds driving snow horizontal, temperatures below zero for weeks. I'd hear it all from inside pit house, muffled, distant, like listening to weather from inside a cave. Word spread slowly through the scattered trappers and settlers. I didn't advertise what I'd built. People saw tiny smoke rising from hillside, saw me moving around in weather that should have kept everyone inside, and they asked questions. First visitor was French-Canadian trapper named Pierre Duchamp. Showed up mid-January when temperature was 18 below. I was outside splitting wood for the week. "They say you live in the ground like a badger," he said. "They say accurate." I would see this. I gestured toward entrance. He followed me through tunnel into main room. His expression went from skeptical to surprised to thoughtful in 10 seconds. Mon Dieu, it is warm. He walked around studying walls, ceiling, fire pit, pressed hand against earth, felt its solidity, looked up at smoke hole, at entrance tunnel, at how everything was arranged. "The Shoshone, they build like this?" "They taught me." "You build this alone?" "Alone." He nodded. "How much wood you burn each day?" I showed him the pile against wall. "This lasts a week." He stared. In his cabin, that amount might last a day. "You will teach me this?" "I can show you what I learned, but you'd need to build before spring. Ground's too frozen now." "I will build in autumn, before next winter." He paused. "My cabin, she is cold like yours was. I burned so much wood, my hands—" He held them up, cracked, bleeding, raw from constant axe work. I knew exactly what that felt like. Before Pierre left, he asked if he could bring others. I told him yes. Knowledge shared was knowledge preserved. Mourning Dove's father had taught me freely. I could do no less. Over 3 weeks, maybe a dozen people crawled through my entrance tunnel. Some curious, some desperate. All left understanding there was another way to survive winter here. February brought the storm everyone dreaded. Started Tuesday morning with wind rattling junipers and snow falling so thick you couldn't see 20 feet. By noon, wind reached maybe 50 miles per hour. By evening, visibility was zero. I was inside pit house, warm and secure, listening to storm scream across hillside above. Sound was muffled but constant, low roar speaking of violence in a world I wasn't part of anymore. Inside, temperature held at 52 degrees. My fire was down to coals. I was comfortable in single wool layer. Storm lasted 3 days. I didn't leave pit house once, didn't need to, had firewood inside, food, water from melted snow, had warmth and shelter, while outside temperature dropped to 25 below, and wind piled snow in drifts, burying anything shorter than 6 feet. Second day of storm, I heard voices outside, faint over wind. Then someone at entrance tunnel crawling through. Then another, then a third. 3 men emerged into my space, covered in snow, shaking from cold. I recognized 2, trappers who'd visited weeks before. Third was stranger. "Storm caught us between settlements," one said through chattering teeth. "Tried to reach trading post. Couldn't see, couldn't find it. Remembered your place near creek. Followed creek here." I built up fire immediately, adding wood until it gave real heat. Men huddled around, hands toward flames. Steam rose from wet clothes. One showed signs of frostbite on face. White patches on cheeks and nose that didn't redden as he warmed. We spent 3 days in that 12-foot space. 4 men, 1 small fire, earth walls holding warmth that would have escaped any cabin. I shared food stores. We took turns sleeping, keeping fire maintained, checking the man with frostbite. Earth didn't care how many people needed warmth. Pit house held 50 degrees whether I was alone or we were crowded. Only difference was we needed slightly more fire to replace heat lost to cold clothes and air coming through. Entrance. But even that was minimal. Wood we burned in 3 days was less than my old cabin would have consumed in 1 night. When storm broke and men left, one looked back at low mound in hillside that had saved their lives. "I'm building one of these come fall," he said. Other two nodded agreement. Coldest part of winter wasn't storms. It was calm. Clear days when temperature dropped to 30 below and stayed there. No wind to blame. No snow to mark cold's passing. Just crystalline air and silence heavy as stone. On those days I'd emerge into landscape transformed. Creek frozen solid. Snow squeaking underfoot. My breath freezing on beard before I'd walked 20 feet. These were days that killed people in poorly built cabins when fire that seemed adequate at dusk would be insufficient by midnight. Inside Pit House, those days felt no different. 50 degrees was 50 degrees. Earth didn't know if surface was 0 or 30 below. It maintained temperature regardless, drawing from warmth buried so deep winter couldn't touch it. I spent days doing work survival required, checking traps, hunting when opportunity arose, cutting firewood, though I needed so little now, processing hides, maintaining equipment. But I also spent time observing. I'd sit in Pit House and think about what I'd learned, about how Earth worked, about how heat moved and cold settled, about how Shoshone had understood these principles through generations of survival in this exact environment. Knowledge wasn't secret, wasn't hidden. It was written in land itself if you knew how to read it. South-facing slopes were warmer. Cold air pooled in valleys. Earth 6 feet down stayed stable. These were facts, observable, repeatable. Anyone could learn them. But it took either desperate need or patient teaching to see them clearly enough to act. By late February, maybe 20 people had visited, some just curious. Others planning to build pit houses before next winter. A few asked if I'd help, offered to trade pelts or labor for guidance. I helped everyone who asked, showed them how to read land for good sites, explained principles of cold air traps and thermal mass, drew diagrams of ceiling construction and entrance tunnels. I wasn't an expert. I'd built exactly one pit house, made mistakes, doing it. But I'd learned from those mistakes, and I could share both successes and failures. March arrived with warmer days and sound of water running under ice. Snow began slow retreat. Creek opened in sections, flowing fast with meltwater. Birds returned. Air lost its edge. I emerged from winter having burned perhaps 1/10 of firewood I'd stockpiled. Massive pile beside old cabin stood barely touched. In Pit House, small stack against wall had been plenty. Pit House itself had weathered winter perfectly. No collapse, no flooding, no cracks in ceiling or walls. Earth that had seemed fragile when I was shaping it proved solid and reliable. Grass mats showed some wear, but nothing that couldn't be replaced. Fire pit stones were discolored from smoke, but intact. My hands, raw and bleeding from axe work in November, had healed. My body, exhausted from never-ending cycle of cutting and hauling wood, had rested and strengthened. I'd eaten regularly, slept deeply, stayed warm continuously. I'd survived winter not by fighting it, but by learning to work with what land provided. Early March, Mourning Dove returned to Valley. I saw her at trading post, same gray mule, same bundle of pelts. She recognized me immediately. "You built a pit house." I did. "It worked?" "Kept me alive. Kept 4 people alive during the big storm in February." She nodded, unsurprised. "My father will be pleased. He said you would listen. Not all white men listen." I pulled out leather cord with stone bead, showed her I still had it. "I hung this above my door like he said. Reminds me where knowledge came from." "Knowledge comes from the earth," she said. "We only learn to hear it. Now you have heard it too." That conversation stayed with me. Knowledge comes from the earth, not from any person or people. Earth had been holding warmth at stable temperatures longer than humans existed. Shoshone had learned to use that. Now I had. And people I'd taught would learn. Knowledge would spread because knowledge was true. By late March, I'd committed to staying in Valley another year. Pit. House had proven itself. I knew I could survive here, more than survive. I could thrive. Could trap, hunt, trade, live comfortably through winters that would have killed me in log cabin. I walked up to my old cabin one mild afternoon. Door hung open. Snow had drifted inside through cracks I'd never sealed. Frost patterns on inside walls had melted, leaving water stains on wood. Stone fireplace stood cold and empty. I didn't feel regret looking at it. That cabin had taught me what I needed to know. It showed me conventional wisdom wasn't always right. It pushed me to a point where I was desperate enough to listen to teaching I might otherwise have dismissed. Cabin had failed, but its failure led me to something better. I closed door and walked back to hillside where low mound marked my pit house. Smoke rose from chimney, thin and steady. Inside, earth was holding warmth like it always did, patient and reliable and indifferent to surface weather. I'd learned what ground had to teach, that survival wasn't about imposing will on environment. It was about understanding how environment worked and finding your place within it. Earth held warmth 6 feet down. Had always held that warmth, would always hold that warmth. Only variable was whether you were humble enough to dig down and accept what it offered. I crawled through entrance tunnel into warmth and silence. Spring was coming, but I'd be ready when winter returned. The knowledge was mine now. The earth had taught me, and earth never lied.